After a quick Google search, I'm sure you'll see for yourself that there are literally hundreds of templates and formats within which to formulate your resume. Since there's no single right way to organize this information, I don't have a particular recommendation for you on a template. With that said, there are several important tips I do have for you. The first is that it's often the case that resumes are submitted either without certification areas listed at all, or perhaps just not listed prominently. There may be as many as 200 to 300 resumes submitted for a single job opening, so when scanning through these documents to make decisions about which candidates to offer an interview, if certification isn't immediately seen, it can take you out of the process from the start. Display this information clearly toward the top of your resume. Next, members of the team are looking to make connections with their new colleague, so to be sure to include a portion of the resume that lists hobbies and interests. Maybe it's yoga or perhaps playing tennis, or maybe you have a green thumb. You never know what will allow you to connect with a member of the team over a common interest. This provides insight into who you are as a person, and every little bit helps. Another element of your resume that can catch the eye of team members is when you list other experiences you have with children. By this, I mean those aside from previous teaching or teacher training. Personally, I always look for this as it reinforces the idea that you're someone who genuinely enjoys working with children and has voluntarily sought out opportunities to do so over the years. Next, the question always arises as to whether or not your resume should be limited to a single page or if it's acceptable for it to run beyond that. Of course, the cliched answer is keep it to a single page. However, this isn't necessarily a must. I will say that as a new teacher, you should be able to capture all of the relevant elements on a single page, but you may be the exception to this if you have extensive experiences that you feel are important to convey, maybe as a career changer. If this is true, don't leave out those experiences simply due to the amount of space on the page or awkwardly try to squeeze them in. What you don't want to do is list a series of previous jobs that you've held that have absolutely nothing to do with children or teaching. The fact that you were a cashier at Target or drove for Uber really isn't going to further your candidacy for the teaching position you're seeking. In fact, when there's unnecessary clutter on a resume, you run the risk of burying the lead, so to speak. We want those reviewing your resume to be drawn to what's most relevant and impressive. There's one element commonly found prominently displayed on resumes that I would not necessarily recommend including. Many candidates include an objective section that outlines what it is they're seeking by submitting their packet. This may list the name of the position, or perhaps it includes the type of environment in which they seek to work. Personally, I don't see this as an effective use of such valuable space at the top of your resume, particularly if you're seeking to keep your information on a single page. And then, the vast majority of school districts now require candidates to submit their application, resume, and cover letter through an online portal. Even though that's the requirement, it doesn't mean you're prohibited from emailing the decision maker a copy of your resume and cover letter as well. In fact, I recommend doing so for the following reasons. It's not unusual at all for a resume reviewer to go in and look at the submissions and see hundreds of them. Many loading their resumes click apply all to any roles that are posted, and this may submit their resume throughout the entire country for jobs in which they have absolutely no interest. By emailing your credentials to a specific employer, they now know you're actively seeking a position at their school, which should increase the likelihood you're invited in for an interview. Also, these submission portals also take your content and format it in the same bland way for all candidates. If you've spent hours creating a well-formatted resume, why not email it out? Give yourself one more chance to catch the eye of the employer. During each process, There are always a few candidates who opt for mailing out a hard copy of their resume and cover letter, which is also a good idea. Occasionally, part of the packet is sent as a trifold brochure of credentials. An added benefit with this type of brochure going out is they provide an opportunity for you to show off some of your technology skill and perhaps even a few photos of you at work within that brochure. Remember that if you're one of only a few who takes this approach and your credentials are laid out in an impressive manner, it could help your chances of being selected for an interview. And then this final resume tip may seem obvious, but you wouldn't believe how many times there are typos on either the cover letters or resumes. These are among the most consequential documents that you've ever produced. What message does it send when there are mistakes on them? Now, I know it happens to everyone at times, but it just can't happen on these documents. Those reviewing your paperwork will be thinking to themselves, if this person can't do a thorough job of proofreading these important documents, what will their correspondence home to families look like? So do yourself a big favor and have as many people as you can read over what you've prepared to check for editing mistakes. By not doing so, you could be eliminating yourself from the process right from the start.
To learn more about how to put your best foot forward in interviews, go to bestfootforwardforteachers.com.